Juniper Holly unlatched the barn door and stepped aside so the stranger could carry his daughter in. The little girl was all limp limbs and dust-smudged cheeks. Her dark braids stuck to her temples, and Juniper's heart pinched at how small she looked in the man's arms. "You sure about this, miss?" he asked quietly, voice rough as gravel, eyes flicking from her sagging porch to the single lantern burning in the window of her cabin. "It's just one night," Juniper said, hoping he couldn't hear the quiver under her practiced steadiness. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you." She pushed the barn door wider, the hinges complaining the way they always did, and nodded toward the empty stall nearest the house. "You can bed your horse there. I've got extra blankets inside for the two of you. It ain't much, but it's dry." He stepped past her, the faint scent of leather and dust and something clean soap, maybe cutting through the musty straw. Up close, he didn't look like the usual drifters who tried their luck at her gate. His hat was sweat-stained, but well-made, his coat patched but stitched with care. Calloused hands, yes, but the kind that knew both reins and pen. The girl's cheek rested against his shoulder, lashes dark fans on pale skin. Juniper forced herself to look away before the ache in her chest turned into something sharp. She'd been that small once, carried through nights that felt too big. "Name's Colt," the man said, easing the child down onto a pile of old feed sacks she'd hastily kicked together. "This is Millie." He shrugged one saddlebag off his shoulder, then the other. "We'll be out of your hair by sunup." Juniper wiped her palms on her faded skirt. "Juniper's fine. And you ain't in my hair yet." Her smile flickered. "You hungry?" Colt's gaze moved past her to the faint glow of the cabin window again. Hunger was there, sure, but not just the kind a pot of beans could fix. Weariness sat in the lines bracketing his mouth, in the tightness around his eyes. "We ate some jerky on the trail," he said. "Millie could use something warm, though." Juniper's stomach clenched, remembering the thin simmering in the pot on her stove enough to quiet her own belly and maybe leave a spoonful for breakfast if she diluted it with water. She nodded anyway. "I've got stew on," she lied, because pride was a heavy thing and hospitality heavier. "Come inside when you're settled." He studied her for a heartbeat longer than was comfortable, like he could see right through the pretense to the chipped plates and the almost empty flour sack, and he tipped his hat. "Obliged, Juniper." She stepped back into the night, boots whispering over packed earth as she crossed the small yard. The cabin looked even smaller with another pair of eyes on it, the porch leaning a little more every year, but it was hers. Hers and the bank's, she corrected silently. She pushed the door open with her shoulder and was greeted by the familiar scent of smoke, iron, and time. The flame under the blackened pot licked low, barely keeping the thin broth simmering. Juniper lifted the lid, steam fogging her face, and saw precisely 4 chunks of carrot, a few slivers of onion, and bone-scraped pieces of last week's rabbit. Her pulse thudded against her throat. "All right," she muttered, reaching for the flour tin. "We stretch." Again. She shook the tin. Maybe 3 spoonfuls, if she was generous. Enough to thicken, make the stew seem fuller than it was. She tipped in too, watching the liquid cloud and swell, and reached for the salt she'd been rationing like it was gold. 3 bowls. She needed 3 bowls. Her hand hovered over the cupboard door. She could eat less, or not at all. It wasn't like the first time. Not like the nights she'd watched her father drink supper instead of eat it. Juniper swallowed, set her jaw, and grabbed the stack of mismatched bowls. The blue one with the chip on the side for Millie little girls liked color. The plain white for the man. The cracked brown for herself. By the time Colt's boots sounded on the porch, she'd added a heel of stale bread sliced into careful, thin pieces to disguise how little there was, and nudged the fire higher to make the room feel more generous than her pantry. The door creaked, and he stepped in, ducking under the low frame out of habit. Millie clung sleepily to his hand, her boots dragging a bit, one lace undone. "Smells good," Colt said, and something in his voice made the words feel like a kindness instead of a politeness. Juniper lifted the pot off the flame. "Sit." There was only one chair and the bench her father had built years back, its top worn smooth from use. Colt hesitated. "Take the chair," she said. "Millie can share the bench with me." He opened his mouth, maybe to argue, then seemed to think better of it. "Yes, ma'am." The ma'am made her want to laugh and flinch at the same time. She wasn't old enough for that, but life had a way of putting years on a woman that didn't show in her face. She helped Millie up onto the bench. Up close, the girl was even smaller than she'd seemed in the barn, her dress worn at the hem but clean, boots scuffed but sturdy. Not destitute, Juniper thought. "Just tired. You from around here?" Juniper asked, ladling stew into bowls. "Passin' through," Colt said. It was the kind of answer men gave when they didn't want to be pinned down. She'd heard it plenty, but his accent wasn't quite local softer, with long vowels that hinted of somewhere further east. Millie yawned so wide Juniper could see the missing tooth at the front. "Papa, can I have extra bread?" Juniper's hand tightened on the ladle for half a second before she forced it to relax. "You can have mine, sunshine," she said lightly. "I ate earlier." That wasn't wholly a lie. She'd had a crust while standing over the stove, counting coins and days. Colt's gaze flicked to her, sharp. "We can share, Millie. There's plenty," Juniper cut in before the girl could wilt. "Eat up." They bowed their heads when Colt murmured grace, low and quick. Juniper kept hers down a beat longer, listening to the cadence of his words, the unadorned way he thanked God for small mercies and safe shelter. When she looked up, she caught him watching her instead of his stew. "You live out here alone?" he asked, tearing his bread in half. His hands were broad, knuckles nicked, skin brown from sun and work. "Alone's cheaper," Juniper replied, keeping her voice even. "Just me and the chickens. And the debt collector who visits when he feels like ruining a day." The corner of his mouth ticked. "Debt collector, huh?" "Mr. Briggs owns half the mortgages in Willow Creek." She shrugged one shoulder, pretending the name didn't make something sink in her gut. "He'll get around to taking the other half soon enough." Millie's spoon clinked against the bowl as she shoveled stew with the single-minded focus of a hungry child. "Papa has men who come to our house, too," she said through a mouthful. "They talk about numbers and fences and how many cows we—" "Millie," Colt said gently but firmly. "Chew first." She obeyed, cheeks flushing. Juniper pretended not to notice the way Colt's jaw tightened, the quick flick of his eyes toward Juniper, as if checking how much she'd heard. "Sounds like you're a rancher," Juniper said casually, taking a small sip of broth that tasted mostly of salt and determination. He hesitated. It was so slight someone else might have missed it. She didn't. "Something like that," he said. Something like that usually meant more than that. Juniper let the silence sit, filling it with the crackle of the fire and the soft sound of Millie's spoon scraping the bottom of her bowl. "You ain't afraid?" Colt asked after a moment. "Of what?" "Letting two strangers into your house." He looked around the cramped cabin like he saw more than peeling paint and patched curtains, like he saw the very smallness of her world. Juniper's fingers traced the groove worn into the table's edge. "I ain't stupid, if that's what you're asking." "That's not what I asked." She met his gaze. His eyes were a gray she'd never seen on a man before, like river water when the sky turned slate, tired but steady. "I'm armed," she said simply. "And you're holding a little girl who looks like she couldn't hurt a fly." Millie looked up, affronted. "I could hurt a fly." Juniper bit back a smile. "My mistake." Colt's mouth quirked. "Appreciate your trust," he sobered. "We're grateful, truly." It was a long ride from town. And the livery had no spare bunks. Of course it didn't. The livery stopped renting bunks for extra horses months ago. Willow Creek was drying up, commerce slipping away toward bigger, shinier places. Her ranch's value slipped with it. "What brings you out this way?" Juniper asked. "Business." The word sat heavy between them, offering nothing. "You're a man of many words, Colt. Only the ones that matter." He scooped the last of the stew from his bowl, then glanced at hers. "You sure you ate?" Her stomach twisted traitorously at the sight of the final chunk of carrot floating in his broth. Positive, he didn't push. But he did tear his remaining half of bread in two and set a piece on the edge of her bowl, like it had just ended up there by accident. She stared at it, something hot pricking the backs of her eyes. "You paid for that," she said quietly. Back in the barn, he had too. The weight of the coins he'd pressed into her hand still sat against her palm in memory. More than she'd asked for. More than the night's shelter was worth. "I paid for a roof," he said. "This here's just manners." Juniper hesitated, then picked up the bread and took a small bite. It was dry, but it soaked up the thin stew and turned soft on her tongue. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until that first swallow. They finished in companionable quiet. Millie's head began to bob, her eyes drifting shut between bites. "Looks like someone's done for the night," Juniper said. Colt glanced at his daughter and softened in a way that made Juniper's chest do a strange, uncomfortable flip. Protective, fierce, like the whole world narrowed to that one small, sleepy face. "Reckon so," he murmured. Juniper pushed back from the table. "I can make up a pallet by the fire. It stays warmer in here than the barn." He shook his head. "Barn's fine for us. The barn's drafty," she countered. "And the coyotes get bold when the moon's bright. You'll sleep lighter listening for them instead of resting." His brows rose just a fraction. "You always argue this much with paying guests?" "I ain't used to having paying guests," she shot back. "Let me do this right." Their gazes held again, a quiet contest of wills. For a moment, she wondered if he'd insist on the barn out of pure stubbornness or male pride. Then he blew out a breath. "All right." Relief loosened something in her shoulders. She moved quickly, rolling out an extra blanket onto the floor and fluffing the one lumpy pillow she owned that wasn't on her own bed. "You can take the corner there," she said. "Millie closest to the fire." "And you?" he asked. "I've slept colder," she said, which was true enough. Her small bedroom at the back of the cabin held on to heat decently. "I'll be fine." She felt his gaze on her as she fussed with the blanket longer than necessary, smoothing non-existent wrinkles. It had been a long time since a man watched her move, and she didn't know what to do with the awareness. Millie was too tired to protest. She toppled onto the pallet like a felled sapling, mumbling something about stars and cows before sleep dragged her under. Colt knelt beside her, fingers gentle as he tugged off her boots and set them neatly by the wall. The tenderness in the simple act twisted inside Juniper like a knife and a bomb all at once. She'd wanted that once. A home where love felt steady, not conditional. Where a man's hands were for work and care, not for throwing plates or slamming doors. "Thank you," Colt said suddenly, voice low so as not to wake his daughter. "For the food. The bed. You paid," she reminded him, wrapping her arms around herself. "Ain't charity. Doesn't lessen the kindness." She didn't know what to say to that, so she nodded toward the hearth. "I'll bank the fire. If you need anything, my room's just back there." She jerked her chin toward the short hallway. "Don't worry, I'm still armed." He gave a huff of quiet laughter. "Wouldn't dream of forgetting it." Juniper banked the fire carefully, leaving enough coals to keep the room warm through the night. As she closed her bedroom door partway, she looked back once. Colt lay on his side, one arm flung over his head, hat tipped low to shadow his eyes. But even in rest, his body held a readiness, a coiled watchfulness that said he wasn't a man entirely at ease anywhere. Millie had rolled toward the warmth, one small hand fisted in the edge of his coat. Juniper shut the door gently against the sight and leaned her forehead against the rough wood for a moment. Two strangers in her home, a handful of extra coins in her tin. Tomorrow, Mr. Briggs would ride up her dusty track and remind her how little that mattered. Sleep did not come easy. She woke before dawn, as she always did, heart thumping like it had been running ahead of her in dreams. Pale light pushed around the edges of the curtains. A rooster crowed somewhere outside, indignant at the delay of breakfast. Juniper pulled on her boots and eased her door open. Colt was awake. He sat with his back against the wall, legs stretched out, hat in his lap. The fire was down to embers, but he'd added a log at some point in the room, for the pleasant warmth instead of a chill. Millie still slept, her mouth slightly open, one braid draped over her cheek. Colt's eyes met Juniper's the moment the hinge creaked. "Maureen," she whispered. He tipped his chin. "Didn't mean to wake you?" "You didn't?" She stepped into the main room, tugging her braid over one shoulder. "Coffee?" "If it's not too much trouble." "Trouble's already here," she muttered under her breath, but she moved to the stove anyway. As she measured out the precious grounds, she felt his gaze sweep around the cabin again, taking in the smallness, the careful order. A man like him catalogued things, she thought, noted them, made judgments. "You live far from town," he said. "Far enough," she replied. "Close enough for Briggs to make the ride when my payment's due." He was silent for a beat. "You're behind," she stiffened. "Didn't say that. Didn't have to." Anger pricked, quick and defensive. "You always this nosy about other folks' business?" "Only when their barn kept my horse dry and their roof kept my girl warm." His tone wasn't sharp, just steady. A man likes to know what kind of trouble might be ridden up his host lane. Her shoulders eased a fraction. "Fair enough." "Mr. Briggs gave me until the end of the month," she said grudgingly. "I got colts to sell, if anyone's buy-in." "They ain't." He didn't phrase it as a question. She let out a breath that felt too big for her ribs. "You really are a man of few words." "Waste not," he said. Juniper poured the boiling water over the grounds, inhaling the bittersweet scent like it might brace her spine for the day. She filled a chipped mug and handed it to him. His fingers brushed hers, warm, rough. He took a careful sip. "Good. You say that like it's a surprise. Say it like it's rare." He nodded toward the door. "You up with the rooster every day?" "Chores don't wait on a lady's beauty sleep." She rolled her eyes. "Gotta feed the chickens, check the fences, see if the well's decided to be temperamental." "I'll help," he said simply. The offer caught her off guard. "You paid for a bed, not a day's work. I paid for last night's shelter." He set the mug down carefully. "This morning's gratitude is on me." She opened her mouth to refuse, then heard Millie shift on the pallet and stopped. The girl would sleep another hour. Colt's horse would need water anyway. And there was that section of fence she'd been meaning to mend before Briggs could use wandering cattle as another mark against her. "You know one end of a hammer from the other?" she asked. "Most days. And you can carry posts while I do the real work." That earned her a genuine smile, quick and bright, like sun breaking through a heavy cloud. It changed his whole face, shaved years off the weariness. "Yes, ma'am." She hated how the warm curl in her stomach answered that smile. Outside, the morning air bit pleasantly at her cheeks as they crossed the yard. The sky stretched high and wide over the scrub and low hills, the world quiet except for the cluck of half-awake hens. Her land might be small compared to the big spreads she'd heard about, but it was dirt she'd bled into, sweated over, prayed for. Every fence post hammered upright, every furrow turned, every calf pulled in the cold. Colt moved with the easy grace of a man used to open space. He watered his gelding at the trough, running a hand along the horse's neck, murmuring something Juniper couldn't quite catch. The animal leaned into the touch like a dog. "Nice animal," she said. "Best partner I ever had," he replied. "Don't argue, don't snore, don't spend my money. High standards, hard-earned." He hefted a bundle of fence posts onto his shoulder like they weighed nothing. Juniper grabbed the hammer and box of nails. They walked the line in companionable silence, the grass brushing against their boots. When they reached the sagging section of fence, Juniper set her jaw. "Wind did a number on this," Colt said, kneeling to inspect the broken post. "Wind and time, and her father's tendency to promise repairs he never quite got around to finishing." She drove the old anger down. It didn't matter anymore. The land was hers to keep or lose, her mistakes to own. They worked without needing many words. Colt held post steady while Juniper swung the hammer, each strike jarring up through her arms. Sweat prickled at her temples despite the cool morning. She liked the burn, the proof she was still stronger than the world thought. "You swing like you've done this a lot," Colt observed. "Since I was tall enough to see over the top rail." "No brothers?" "Had one. He decided the city had more to offer than blisters." The words tasted bitter. "Left you with the blisters," Colt said. "Someone had to take 'em," she replied. He glanced at her, something like respect in his eyes. "That's so." She didn't know what to do with that look either. By the time they finished the last post, the sun had cleared the low hills, casting long shadows. Juniper stretched her back, wincing. "Thank you," she said, surprised to find she meant it more than she'd expected. Briggs would have loved to point at that and call it neglect. "Briggs sounds like a man I wouldn't play cards with," Colt said dryly. "Briggs doesn't play. He just takes." Colt's jaw hardened. "Not if he ain't owed." Juniper laughed once, short. "Oh, he's owed. My father saw to that. Your father took out the mortgage, and then took out another and another. It's like he was seeing how many signatures he could scrawl before his hand cramped." She blew out a breath. "Then he went and died before he had to look Briggs in the eye. Left you to do it for him." Colt's voice was quiet. "Someone had to," she said again. This time, there was no pride in it, just weary fact. They headed back toward the cabin. The sight of it leaning porch, peeling paint, one good window that hadn't cracked yet landed heavy in her chest. Home and burden all wrapped together. Millie stood on the porch now, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, hair mussed from sleep. She blinked at them owlishly. "Papa?" Colt's face softened again. "Morning, Bug." She shuffled down the steps and straight into his side, her thin arms wrapping around his waist. That bed was softer than the one in the wagon. "Don't get used to it," he said gently. Juniper's gaze caught on that word wagon. He wasn't just passing through on horseback. He was moving. "You two on the road for long?" she asked as they reached the porch. "Long enough," Colt said. Millie craned her neck to look at Juniper. "Do you have more of that stew?" Juniper's heart clenched. "I can fry some eggs," she said. "Chickens were generous this week." "We'd be much obliged," Colt said. As Juniper moved back into the rhythm of the kitchen cracking eggs, slicing the last of the bread thinner than reason, scrubbing the pan so the food didn't taste like yesterday's worries, she let herself pretend for a moment that this was normal. A man at her table. A child laughing at the way the yolks ran. Voices filling the cabin instead of the echo of her own thoughts. She almost didn't hear the hoofbeats at first. When the sound finally cut through the sizzle of eggs, the clink of cutlery, it slid down her spine like cold water. Colt noticed the way her shoulders went rigid. "Expecting company?" he asked. "Not the kind I like," she muttered. A moment later, the knock came. Hard, familiar. Juniper Howe. The voice was all sharp edges and false cheer. Lovely morning, ain't it? Her jaw clenched. That's Briggs, she said. Colt's hand settled lightly on Millie's shoulder. You want us out of sight? She hesitated. Pride battled practicality. Briggs would see the extra horse outside anyway. But him seeing Colt and Millie inside her cabin, at her table Juniper, could already hear the insinuations, the raised brows. Stay, she said before she could overthink it. I got nothing to be ashamed of. Colt studied her for a heartbeat, then nodded. Juniper wiped her hands on her apron and went to the door. She opened it to find Mr. Briggs astride his mare, looking far too polished for a man who made a living picking bones clean. His hat sat at a smug angle, boots too shiny by half. 2 ledgers bulged from his saddlebag like fat ticks. Morning, Miss Hawley, he drawled. You look well. Can't say the same for your manners, she replied. You know better than to pound on a lady's door like you're the law. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Some would say I am. Out this far. She stepped onto the porch, pulling the door almost closed behind her. You're early, she said, squinting up at him. Thought I had till month's end. You did. He twisted his reins idly in his gloved hands. Consider this a friendly visit. A reminder. Friendly, she repeated flatly. I like to see my investments. His gaze slid over the sagging porch, the patched roof. Make sure they're still ... viable. Anger flared in her chest, right and familiar. I'm not a busted wagon wheel. Briggs. No, he agreed slowly. But a ranch that can't meet its notes is just land waitin' for a better steward. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. I'll meet them. With what? He tipped his head. Heard the cattle buyers in town have been less than generous. Market soft. Hard to sell what folks ain't buying. I'll find a way. She hated the way it sounded stubborn more than certain. Briggs' eyes sharpened. You always were a proud one. Like your pa. My pa signed his name where he shouldn't have. The words came out before she could temper them. I'm just cleaning up after. And I've been more than patient, Briggs said, letting the sweetness drop from his voice. But patience don't pay the bank in town, and it sure don't fix fences or dig new wells. His gaze flicked toward the side of the house, where the patched section of fence they'd just mended stood straight and stout. Though I see you've been attempting improvements. Juniper's chin lifted. I keep my place up. He shifted in his saddle, the leather creaking. End of the month, Miss Halla. Full payment, plus the interest we discussed. Or the deed passes to me. The words hung heavy in the morning air, thicker than smoke. You already told me that, she said quietly. Twice. Consider this the third. I find folk remember things better in threes. He smiled again, thin and sharp. Of course, there might be ... alternatives. Juniper's stomach turned. I'm not marrying you, Briggs. He chuckled, the sound unpleasant. Now. Don't flatter yourself. I got a wife who spends my money just fine. His gaze slid over her, lingering a fraction too low. Was thinking more along the lines of you staying on as caretaker. Live in the bunkhouse, work my land instead of yours. A roof's a roof, no? Humiliation washed hot up her neck. He wanted her to watch him own every inch of what she'd fought to keep. I'd rather sleep under a bridge, she said. Bridges around here ain't got much shelter. He clucked to his mare, then paused. End of the month, he repeated. Don't make me send the sheriff. He turned his horse with a flick of his wrist and trotted back down the track, leaving dust and the echo of his ultimatum behind. Juniper stared after him until he disappeared over the low rise. Her hands shook. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. You all right? Colt's voice came from behind her, low and steady. She hadn't heard the door open. She sucked in a breath and turned. He stood in the doorway, Millie peeking around his leg. He'd set his hat back on, shadowing his eyes, but she could still see the tightness in his jaw. Fine, she lied. Same song, different verse. He threatens you often? Colt asked. He informs me of my options, she said tightly. Lose the ranch, or lose the ranch while working for him. Real generous fellow. Millie's brows knit. He's mean. Juniper forced a smile for the girl's sake. He's just doing his job, Sunshine. His job don't require him to enjoy it, Colt murmured. Their gazes met, something unspoken sparking between them. Anger, hopelessness, a strange shared recognition. Breakfast is getting cold, Juniper said abruptly, needing motion to keep from falling apart on her own porch. Back inside, she moved too quickly, banging pans, slamming the oven door a little harder than necessary. The eggs had overcooked while she'd faced Briggs, edges gone brown. The bread was more toast than anything now. Smells good, Millie offered timidly. Juniper forced herself to soften. The girl's wide eyes weren't to blame for any of this. Eat up, she said, setting plates down. Gotta fuel you for the trail. We could stay, Millie blurted. I can help with chores. I'm good with chickens. Juniper's breath caught. Millie, Colt said gently. We don't invite ourselves to stay where we're guests. But she needs help, Millie insisted. Mr. Briggs is, Millie. His tone sharpened just enough. The girl flushed and dropped her gaze. Juniper swallowed the lump at her throat. Your daddy's right, Sunshine. Colt's fork pushed food around his plate. How much? He asked suddenly. Juniper blinked. How much what? You behind on the note. He met her eyes, no judgment there. Just calculation. Why? You looking to buy yourself a pity project? The words came out more bitter than she'd intended. He didn't flinch. Just a skin. $200, she said, because a part of her was tired of holding the number like a stone in her chest. Plus interest. Millie's eyes went round. That's a lot. More than I got, Juniper said. You got cattle, Colt said. I got cattle nobody's buy-in. Horses. Yearlings that might fetch decent coin come spring if I still own the ground they re-standin' on. Silence stretched for a long moment. You could sell to him, Millie said softly. Mr. Briggs. Then he wouldn't be mad anymore. Juniper forced a smile that felt like it cracked something inside. Some things ain't worth the price. She set her fork down carefully. Enough talk about my mess. What about you two? Where you headed? Colt's jaw worked once, like he was grinding up words before swallowing them. North, he said finally. Got business with a man who owns more land than sense. Sounds like Briggs, Juniper muttered. This one's worse. Something like contempt flickered in his eyes. He buys up every struggling spread from here to Dry Gulch, then rents the land back to the same folks at double the rate. Calls it providing opportunity. What's his name? Juniper asked. Colt hesitated. Lane, he said. Beckett Lane. The name hit her like a blow. She'd heard it murmured in the saloon when she'd gone to town for feed, spoken with half awe and half bitterness. A man whose brand rode on thousands of head of cattle, whose fences cut across once open range like scars, whose money greased the bank's wheels and Mr. Briggs' ambitions. I know the name, she said slowly. Folks say he owns half of Willow Creek's mortgages now. Folks say a lot, Colt replied. You work for him? He took a measured sip of coffee instead of answering. You do, she said. Or you did. Does it matter? He asked quietly. The question landed heavier than it should have. Did it? If he was tied to the man who held her future, what did that mean? Not unless you're here to measure my land for fences, she said. His mouth twitched. I ain't here for your land. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust the way he'd moved in her kitchen, the way he de-lit the fire and fixed her fence and let his daughter eat the bigger portion of eggs. But she'd trusted men's words before. The rest of breakfast passed in fits and starts of conversation. Millie chattered about a creek they'd crossed 3 days back, about a dog they'd once had to leave behind with neighbors. about the way the stars looked from the back of a wagon when you weren't afraid to look up. Juniper listened, laughing where she could, feigning normalcy. But beneath it all, her thoughts kept circling the same drain. End of the month. $200. Briggs' smug smile. Colt's unreadable eyes when he'd said Lane's name. When the plates were empty, and Millie had gone to say goodbye to the chickens, Juniper moved to the corner where an old biscuit tin sat on a high shelf. She pulled it down and popped the lid. The coins Colt had pressed into her hand last night glinted on top of the small, sad pile she'd scraped together over months' dips from selling eggs in town. Odd jobs. A few dollars her brother had sent from the city before his letters stopped coming. She counted quickly, lips moving silently. Not enough. Not nearly. Juniper, she started, nearly dropping a coin. Colt stood a few feet away, hat in his hands. Without it, his hair lay in unruly waves over his forehead, more boyish than she'd expected. You always sneak up on women counting their money? She asked, snapping the lid back on. Only the ones I'm trying to help, he said. Her laugh was harsh. Thought we agreed. I'm not a charity case. This ain't charity. He took a step closer, holding her gaze. It's business. Business, she echoed warily. I need a place to lay low for a spell, he said. A week, maybe 2. Her brows shot up. From who? From the kind of men who don't like being told no. His mouth twisted. The kind who think money buys everything, including other men's time. Lane, she said. He didn't deny it. I can't pay you what Briggs is demanding, he went on. But I can pay you more than a night's shelter. I can work, fix your fences, dig that new well you've been putting off, help you get those yearlings ready for sale, where they fetch better prices than this dried-up town. He jerked his chin toward the distant cluster of buildings that made up Willow Creek. You seem real sure you know what I need, she said, crossing her arms. I know land, he said simply. And I know what men like Briggs and Lane do to folks who fall behind. His voice roughened. You deserve a better fight than the one you're losing. His words slid under her skin, into the places she kept guarded. He spoke like a man who'd seen it happen more than once, who'd watched good people crushed under boots too big for their own. Why here? She asked. Why me? You passed a dozen ranches between town and my gate. His gaze dropped for the first time, flicking to the side. Your barn was the first one with its door open, he said. Juniper snorted. That's a fancy way of saying you got lucky. Maybe. His eyes found hers again. Or maybe I was looking for someone who still left doors open. The way he said it made something in her chest flutter and ache all at once. You'd pay enough to make a difference? She asked, forcing her voice steady. I'd pay what I can. He named a figure. Her breath caught. It wasn't the full amount. Not even close. But it would plug a leak or two. Buy her time. I don't take men's money in exchange for silence about their secrets, she said. I ain't asking you to, he replied. You want to shout my business from the church roof. That's your right. I'm a skin for work and a roof for my girl, not for you to lie. Millie's laughter drifted in from outside, high and bright. What kind of trouble are you in, Colt? Juniper asked quietly. He hesitated, a long beat, then blew out a breath. The kind that comes when a man tells his employer he's done watching decent folks get bled dry, he said. I told Lane I wouldn't oversee another foreclosure. Not on a place run by a woman raising a brood on her own, or a man with a bad leg, or an old couple who've given 40 years to the dirt. Juniper's throat tightened. And he didn't take kindly to that. He don't take kindly to anyone saying no. Colt's mouth twisted. He reminded me who owned my house. My land, the wagon my girl sleeps in. So you left, she said. So I left, he confirmed. With what the law says is mine, and what I could carry. His gaze flicked briefly toward the barn, where his horse and wagon waited. He'll send men after me, eventually. Men who like their pay and their power. I'd rather they found me somewhere I can see 'em comin'. You think my doorstep is that place?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "I think a woman who tells a man like Briggs she'd rather sleep under a bridge than work for him unlikely to scare easy. She shouldn't have liked that as much as she did." "You bring danger with you," she said. "Danger's already on your ledger," he countered. "I'm just offering a different kind. One that fights back." She looked past him out the window. The field stretched away, rough and stubborn, dotted with scrub and rock, and the thin promise of this year's calves. This land had been her whole world for so long, she couldn't imagine losing it. And yet she could. Every night, in sharp, vivid flashes. "You stay," she said slowly, "and Briggs hears I'm harboring some runaway foreman from Beckett Lane's empire. He'll use it. He'll say I'm colludin' or some fool thing." "Briggs don't know my face," Colt said. "Lane keeps his overseers surprisingly faceless." "You sure about that?" "Sure enough." He stepped closer. "Let me help you, Juniper. You helped me when you had no reason to." Her heart thudded dully. She'd spent so long doing everything alone. The idea of leaning even a fraction of her weight onto someone else felt like standing on a cliff's edge. "1 week," she said finally. "You work. You pay what you say. You don't bring the law or Lane's men to my door. And at the end of the week?" he asked. "We'll see if either of us is still standing." A slow smile tugged at his mouth. "Reckon we will." His hand extended between them. She stared at it for a beat and set her palm in his. It was like closing a deal with a thunderstorm. The next days blurred into a rhythm Juniper hadn't known she was starving for. Colt rose before dawn with her, stoking the fire, boiling coffee, checking the animals. He moved around her kitchen like he'd been there for years, knowing without asking where she kept the flour, the matches, the good knife that still held an edge. Millie trailed after Juniper like a small, determined shadow, asking questions about everything from how eggs got their shells to why the sky looked bigger out here than it had in the town they'd left. They fixed fences. They cleared stones from the upper pasture so the yearlings wouldn't turn ankles. Colt put his shoulder into moving rocks. Juniper had resigned herself to working around for years. He dug a new channel from the small creek that cut across her property, widening it to feed a holding pond he assured her would be worth its weight in clear water come high summer. "You think like a man who's built things bigger than this," she said one afternoon, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her arm. "I think like a man who knows what it's like to watch a well run dry," he replied. She didn't ask if he meant the literal kind or the kind measured in hope. At night, after supper, they sat at the scarred table while Millie drew pictures on scraps of paper horses with legs too long, houses with crooked chimneys, a girl with braids holding hands with a woman in a blue dress. "That's you," Millie said shyly one evening, tapping the drawn woman's face. Juniper's throat tightened. "You've given me more hair than I got." "That's 'cause you're magical," Millie said matter-of-factly. "You fixed our wagon wheel and you make the best eggs." "I've been called a lot of things," Juniper said. "Magical ain't usually on the list." Colt's gaze lingered on her a beat longer than necessary. "Maybe it should be," he murmured. She looked away, heart tripping. As the weeks slid by, the biscuit tin grew heavier. Every night, Colt laid a few more coins inside without fanfare. He didn't ask how close she was to the amount she needed. She didn't volunteer, but she counted always. After the house was quiet, after Millie's breathing had evened out and Colt's faint snore drifted through the wall, she sat on the edge of her narrow bed and counted. Closer, but not there. And Briggs' deadline rode nearer with every sunrise. On the 7th day, as the sun sank low and painted the fields in copper, Juniper and Colt stood side by side at the fence line, watching the yearling's nose at the new water trough he'd rigged. They'll fetch better in Dry Gulch, he said. Buyers there pay fair for good stock. Dry Gulch is 3 days' ride, she said. I know. He glanced at her. I can take him. She stared. You'd do that? I told you. I owe you. I owe you, she shot back. You've been working like 3 men and a mule all week. He shrugged, the movement easy. I'm used to it. You'd leave Millie? Here, he said simply. If you'd have her? Her heart lurched. I'm no nursemaid. You're more than that, he said quietly. Heat crawled up her neck. She likes it here, he added. Feels ... safe. His gaze swept the land, the cabin, the barn. I reckon I like it too. Her chest went tight. Don't go macking this harder, she said. We had a deal. 1 week. And it's been one hell of a week, he said. You gonna throw me off your land now? She huffed out a breath that was almost a laugh. You ain't that easy to throw. His smile flashed, then faded. Let me take the yearlings, Juniper. I know the buyers in Dry Gulch. I know how to talk their language. I can get you more than the vultures in Willow Creek will ever offer. Trust was a fragile bridge. She'd built it plank by plank with him this week without meaning to. Letting him take her best stock felt like stepping onto that bridge blindfolded. If you don't come back, she asked quietly. Then you'll know I'm a bastard like the rest, he said. And you'll be down 1 stranger, and a handful of horses you were gone, now lose to Briggs anyway. That's supposed to make me feel better? Supposed to make you see the choice plain. He faced her fully. You can wait for Briggs to come take what's his, and what's yours along with it. Or you can gamble on me trying to make it hurt him more than you. She hated that he was right. Hated that the only options left to her all felt like leaping off cliffs and praying the ground was kind. I don't like gambling, she said. Then call it faith, he replied. Her breath stuttered. Faith had been a scarce thing in her life lately. She looked over at the cabin, where Millie's small figure could be seen in the window, holding up a drawing for the dying light to examine. The girl grinned when she saw them looking, pressing the paper to the glass. Juniper looked back at Colt. You bring my horses back, she said slowly, and you don't cheat me on the price. And maybe I'll start believing you ain't like the man you used to work for. That's all I can ask, he said. She swallowed. All right. He extended his hand again. This time, when she took it, there was no hesitation. It felt like sealing something more than a deal. They spent the next day preparing. Colt checked the yearlings' hooves, tightened cinches, packed enough feed and water for the trail. Juniper baked what little extra bread she could, wrapping it in cloth for his saddlebags. Millie alternated between excitement and worry. I've never been away from Papa for 3 days, she said that night, voice small. Juniper tucked her into the pallet by the fire, smoothing hair back from her forehead. He'll be back before you know it. What if Mr. Lane's men find him? Millie whispered. Juniper's heart clenched. Your papa's clever, she said, and stubborn. Men like that are hard to catch. You're stubborn too, Millie said sleepily. Guess we'll be impossible then, Juniper murmured. When the house finally quieted, Juniper went to her room and opened the biscuit tin one last time. She counted the coins, fingers moving automatically. Still short. Even if Colt brought back exactly what he promised, and she believed now that he would, it might not be enough to meet Briggs fully, but it would be more than nothing. And maybe, just maybe, more was all God expected of her. She closed the tin, set it back on the shelf, and crawled into bed. Sleep stayed away, hovering just out of reach. Her mind kept circling images of Colt on the trail, of men with Lane's brand on their coats blocking his path, of Briggs' satisfied smile as he took the deed from her hands. Somewhere around the darkest hour before dawn, she finally drifted off. She woke to the sound of muffled voices, male voices. Her heart lurched into her throat. Juniper scrambled out of bed, bare feet slapping the cool floor. She grabbed the shotgun from its spot behind the bedroom door and eased into the narrow hall. The voices came from outside, near the barn. One was Colt's, low, steady. The other was unfamiliar, sharper, with an edge of mocking amusement. "You always were soft, Carter," the stranger said. "Carter, walking away from a setup like you had," the man went on. Lane's right furious. Juniper's breath caught. Carter, not Colt. The name tasted foreign and yet right on her tongue. Had he lied about that, too? "He can be as furious as he likes," came Colt Carter's voice. "I told him I'm done." Juniper crept to the front window and peeked through the thin curtain. 3 men sat their horses in the yard. Colt Carter stood by the barn door, one hand resting casually on his belt, the other hanging loose by his side. He looked relaxed. But she recognized the set of his shoulders now, the coiled readiness. The man in front, with the mocking voice, wore a long coat bearing a small, familiar brand on the breast. A stylized L. Lane. "He said you'd come crawling back," the man drawled. "After your pride cooled." "He don't know me as well as he thinks," Colt Carter said. The man's grin widened. "We ain't here to bring you back, boy. We're here to take what's his." His gaze flicked toward the cabin. Juniper's blood turned to ice. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.